And our last intervention from Dr. Lamis Jomaa.
Thank you. So I'm told I have very limited time. For those who know me, I do speak fast. I'll try to be as calm as possible. It's a pleasure to be part of this panel. Definitely very interesting, very well written and thorough report. Thank you for sharing it with us, Clemence and Nadim, today. I'm going to be building on a few topics that I think are of interest to me and to many of us here, and the MENA in particular. So we've talked about global hunger being back on the rise after we've had strides in terms of improvement in the prevalence of undernutrition. The GWP data and the FAO data that shows that the food insecurity prevalence is also increasing, unfortunately, worldwide. It's going from 8.8 to 9.3%. That represents about 688 million individuals worldwide. If we were to look at the MENA region alone, 11.8% are actually severely food insecure. So this is not mentioning the other forms of food insecurity. A lot of this worsening in trends in global hunger and food insecurity have been linked to the persistent conflicts and to the, basically that brings us to the topic of the Arab Uprising and how food insecurity was not only an outcome and is not an outcome, but is argued to be a strong contributor. And I know Clemence can actually argue more on that matter. So in the era of globalization, when we're talking about food insecurity and conflicts, we cannot but talk about refugees, and refugees cannot be looked at from a regional lens. And I want to here focus more on that chapter, particularly that's looking at the tightening of borders and the immigration restrictions, as Clemence said about the US travel ban that was recently also rolled out with the Supreme Court, the UK Brexit, many of the European countries that are taking quite a stand in terms of being more restrictive to migrants and to human movement. What does this mean in terms of food insecurity? It's definitely asking big questions. And here's where I start thinking about how much literature is out there in terms of the food insecurity and migration. The report does address that there's really minimal evidence looking at that particular two intertwined, very simple maybe to look at in terms of migration and food insecurity. But when we look at these two together in the literature, we don't have much extensive history or much evidence. Which brings us to the point that I want to make here, if you forget nothing from what I'm saying, but that point is that we need to build a lot of evidence and research to change the current rhetoric, because this anti-globalism that we're hearing about more, the fear of the refugees, its impact on the host community, there's not enough evidence that actually supports that it could be that much of a burden. And this, basically what I'm trying to say here is that there is a bunch of recommendations that I thought about when I was thinking about this particular panel and this report. Number one, we need to think about promoting research in complex, protracted crises. It's not enough to look at a humanitarian or emergencies as short-term, and I think that the MENA has been witnessing this. We're a very volatile region. We should be learning from our history. I think it comes at a prime time to start looking at that in particular. And the Syrian crisis, the Yemeni crisis, could be looked as an opportunity not to be missed to learn, because we have extended number of refugees, thousands and millions of refugees that have been basically fled their countries, and they're receiving a lot of interventions. So what's working? What's not working? We need to look further into that. So the MENA region needs much more work. We cannot think only about the refugees and not look at the host community, and I think we've learned that also in Lebanon and Jordan and Turkey. There's a lot of evidence that's out there. When we talk about food insecurity, we need to think about what's working that's making those host communities more resilient. So I look at Lebanon as an example that is facing a lot of strain when it comes to the refugees, and the Ministry of Agriculture representative and many have been talking about the burden, but it could be also an opportunity, and we need to think about how we can build the evidence. What is working for the Lebanese host community? Why are they resilient? What can we promote for now and for the future? I think there are a lot of studies that are, actually a few studies that are out there that are basically highlighting that the host community is not being looked at. In Lebanon, the REACH report that was done with the FAO and the Ministry of Agriculture, and another study that we conducted here at AUB in 2015, they both reports report the host community is very important. That we talk about the refugees and the prevalence of food insecurity, definitely high, definitely needs more work. We need to think more about raising more funds. The WFP representatives here can definitely echo that, but it's not enough to just look at this. The data from our studies are showing that about 49% of Lebanese households with children, we looked at that particular population of 4 to 18-year-old, were actually food insecure. 42% of which are moderately to severely food insecure. So the host community needs to be looked at even more. And when we look at the data with food security, as a nutritionist, I can't but think about not just the macroeconomic, but definitely the household level and the individual level. So we need to look at food consumption behaviors. We need to look at the vulnerable population groups. We always talk about mothers, women, children. Definitely that's very important to vulnerable groups. Preliminary evidence from our studies are showing that women and mothers, as well as their children, from the food insecure households are not consuming adequate diets in terms of quality. There is a risk of increased overweight and obesity, and that is quite challenging in today's world when we're talking about the nutrition transition. Maybe we have a room a bit to talk about the impact of globalization on nutrition and nutrition transition and how we can roll that backward. My last 2 points are we need to streamline nutrition within the food security agenda. And I think I want to say that because we talk a lot about nutrition, but it seems sometimes to be like an afterthought. And we need to definitely put it and streamline it. Contribution of nutritionists and public health professionals need to be addressed. Whether we're talking about the Sustainable Development Goals and we're talking about nutrition-sensitive agriculture, what does that really mean? It means food quality from production to consumption. So we need to be major players there. And finally, is more of a recommendation and kind of an open for debate is how we can look at a comprehensive food and nutrition security strategy in our home country, in Lebanon, in the MENA region. I don't think we have enough of how we look at them together. We still are fragmented. We still have the food being divided between the Ministry of Agriculture, the Ministry of Economy and Trade, the Ministry of Health is playing a significant role, but not on the food security, but on the food safety. So this lingo needs to be brought together, not just the UN agencies or the international donors and organizations, the Lebanese government together, the civil society. We need to look at that. And a final thought is, if we always continue to look at the refugee crisis or the protracted crisis that we are seeing and witnessing as a UNHCR mandate or as a one government mandate, it's not enough. They're overstretched, basically. We need to look at this much more globally, and this is where global governance and that chapter that you highlighted, and I know that it takes much more, there's much more in the report talking about that. Thank you, and yeah, I'll open it to debate.